When most folks think about NASA, they picture clean-cut scientists in white lab coats, American flags, moon landings, space shuttles, intelligent men doing intelligent things in the name of progress and discovery. What they generally do not picture is occult rituals out in the California desert. They do not picture sex magic. They do not picture Aleister Crowley. They do not picture a man standing beneath the shadow of a place literally called the Devil's Gate while trying to unlock the heavens with rockets in one hand and ceremonial occultism in the other. But that's exactly where this story goes. Tonight we're talking about a man named Jack Parsons. Most people have never heard of him, which is wild considering this man helped lay the groundwork for modern rocket propulsion in America. Without men like Parsons, there's a very good chance America doesn't get to the moon when it did. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, one of the crown jewels of NASA history, traces directly back to the work Parsons and his associates were doing in the 1930s and 1940s. Yet despite all that, the average person has no idea who he was. And maybe that's because his story sounds less like a chapter from a science textbook and more like a fever dream somebody had after eating expired gas station sushi at 3 in the morning. Because Jack Parsons was not merely a scientist. He was an occultist, a devoted follower of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, the beast, the most wicked man on the planet. A man deeply involved in ritual magic. Jack Parsons was a man who believed spiritual entities could be contacted. A man who blended science, mysticism, sex rituals, and rocket propulsion together into one strange worldview that honestly sounds like something straight out of Babylon itself. I am not saying every NASA employee is secretly wearing black robes and sacrificing goats under the full moon before launching satellites. That's not what this is. But what I am saying is this. The spiritual roots surrounding the birth of American rocketry were far stranger, darker, and more occultic than most people realize. And once you start pulling on that there string, folks, it just keeps on unraveling the tapestry. Because while Parsons was helping pioneer rocket science during the day, something else was growing in the background at night. And this is where the story starts drifting into territory that feels deeply symbolic, whether you believe in the supernatural or not. See, Parsons wasn't merely fascinated with outer space. He was fascinated with hidden knowledge, mysticism, the occult, esoteric teachings, and eventually that curiosity would lead him towards one of the most infamous occult figures of the 20th century, Aleister Crowley. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Crowley, don't worry. We're going to get into him deeply in the next segment. But for now, just understand this was not some harmless, quirky philosopher writing poetry in a coffee shop somewhere. Crowley openly referred to himself as the Beast 666. Yeah, that beast. The man built an entire spiritual movement around occult rituals, ceremonial magic, altered states, sexual rites, and the pursuit of hidden spiritual power. And somehow, this is the world that Jack Parsons became deeply involved in. Now, let me stop and say something important here before folks start misunderstanding me. Curiosity itself isn't evil. Studying things isn't evil. Reading about the occult to understand history or theology isn't automatically evil. But there's a difference between studying darkness and participating in it. I know firsthand. And Parsons didn't just study it. He embraced it. That's where things start getting uncomfortable. Because the deeper you dig into Parsons' life, the harder it becomes to separate his scientific ambitions from his spiritual beliefs. To him, these things weren't necessarily disconnected. Rocketry wasn't merely mechanical. It was transcendent, almost spiritual. The ideal of man ascending into the heavens, piercing the sky, unlocking hidden realms, breaking earthly limitations. You can start seeing why this kind of thinking would overlap with occult philosophies, especially the kind centered around enlightenment through forbidden knowledge. Now, personally, as a believer, I can't help but notice how often humanity repeats the same pattern over and over again. Babble. Always babble. Men reaching upward. Men seeking hidden power. Men believing enlightenment or transcendence can be achieved apart from God. The issue is the spirit guiding the hand holding the tool. And in Parsons' case, that spirit world became increasingly important to him. Now, during these early rocket experiments, Parsons and the others often worked near a place in Arroyo Seco called Devil's Gate. And look, I know somebody listening right now is already rolling their eyes going, "Oh, come on, that's just a name." Sure, maybe, but it's still creepy, especially considering what would later happen there. Because years later, Parsons reportedly returned to the same area to conduct occult rituals and ceremonies. So now the symbolism starts stacking up. Rocket experiments, occult rituals, Devil's Gate, attempts to ascend beyond earthly boundaries. But folks, it's one heck of a coincidence. And the older I get, the less I believe this world is nearly as spiritual neutral as modern society pretends it is. There is an unseen realm. We've been trained to think reality is just cold machinery, matter bouncing into matter, random chemicals and electrical impulses. But the Bible paints a very different picture. The Bible describes principalities, powers, spiritual wickedness in high places. And when you start looking honestly at certain parts of human history, especially among elite circles of power, science, politics, entertainment, and influence, you begin noticing that occult fascination shows up over and over again. Sometimes openly. And Jack Parsons was absolutely open about it.